than that. And it was on March 24th, 2020, that the government of India, under the leadership of our Prime Minister, ordered a nationwide lockdown for 21 days to start with, and limiting movement of the entire 1.3 billion Indians, and something which is very, very difficult to do. And the people were really scared. And the lockdown, of course, continued till May end, and in some containment zones till June end. And some areas are still the containment zone. And this story is known to all of us. I don't think I should be talking about this story. Well, as Dr. Shashank always says, I pick a few words from Dr. Shashank. The only certainty about the COVID virus is the uncertainty. And this is very, very right. And then there is, of course, the second fear of the second wave. Somebody said it's going to be November, somebody says December, somebody says January. Nobody's really sure. And there is hope of the vaccine, there is apprehension to move around freely. Of course, one set of people are extremely careless and they're taking chances. They're so bogged down with the boredom of staying back at home. They say, hell with all this, let me just go out and have a good time. Well, to talk about all these things and maybe much more, then we have a panel of experts consisting of Dr. Shashank, Anup Mishra, Sanjay Pujari, Dr. Ramchandra Banchi Sabu, and of course, Dr. Anjana Bhatni. They all come from different areas in the field of medicine. Shashank is a Padma Shri awardee and Anup is also a Padma Shri awardee. Shashank is the Dean of the Indian College of Physicians, an endocrinologist who held the position of presidency both at the Endocrine Society and RSSDI. And of course, he has so many awards. He's been on one of the most active persons in the field of COVID ever since it has started. Welcome, Shashank, to this GCC platform. Then we have Dr. Ramchandra, who is the director of Kidwai Memorial Institute of Oncology. We know it's one of the premier most institutes. And not only is a great surgeon, but to sit as an administrator and to handle COVID takes a lot of courage and a lot of planning and strategy. Welcome, Dr. Ramchandra, to this panel. We have Dr. Anup Mishra, the executive chairman of Fortis, who is a Padma Shri awardee again. And then he's been the editor of the major journals all along. And then he's been a great friend and a great diabetologist. We have Sanjay Pujari, who's the director and chief consultant, Institute of Infectious Diseases from Pune. And then he will throw in a lot of light about the vaccines and other things. He's also been in the ICMR panel, and so is Shashank. Well, we have Banchi Sabu, who is always the ever smiling friend of ours, who is right now the president of RSSDI and also the honorary secretary of Diabetes India. Thank you so very much, Banchi. I think you have done a lot of webinars related to COVID, but let's have a different type of webinar. And I welcome Dr. Anjana Bhatni, who runs an NGO now, who is the director and a partner and head of research and projects at the Etrimed Biotech. She's an immunologist, and she will be talking a little about the vaccine. She'll be talking about the new plant formulations that are being used as antivirus and so many other new things. Okay, I've been requested by Dr. Ramchandra. He has to leave because he has to meet the chief ministers. There are meetings in Bangalore happening about various other aspects. So I will ask a few questions that I wanted to ask you, Dr. Ramchandra. If you are ready, shall I go ahead, sir?
Sir, please.
Thank you. I think the major question is there was an absolute panic when the COVID started because the surgeons were not ready to operate even on emergencies. And this happened even in premier institutes like Kidwai, and you yourself were the director of this place. I mean, what was the strategy? What was the fear? And what is the protocol today if there is an emergency? Because RT-PCR, you have to wait for 24 to 48 hours. You can't do a CT scan in all the patients. Antigen rapid antibody tests are not really telling us the real story. Where do people with cancer go if it's an emergency? That's my question to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Arvind for inviting me today. No, my busy schedule goes on till late night. He knows that. So in this scenario, I would like to tell you, Kidwai Memorial Institute of Oncology is a regional cancer center. We treat about, before COVID, we used to treat about approximately 1,200 to 1,500 patients every day. On an average in a year, about 20,000 new cases and about nearly 4 lakh follow-up cases we used to see in institute. Imagine a pandemic comes, where will these patients go? And that we all know that cancer setup is an immunocompromised setup. It means to say most of them are, their immunity is low. So we cannot close down. Let any hospital can close down. Okay, even heart hospital closes down unless there's an emergency. They can manage, but where will this patient go? Somebody has received 1 cycle, somebody has received 2 cycles of chemotherapy, somebody is posted for surgery, somebody is taking radiotherapy. That schedule is for 30 days. How will they manage? How to manage? Suddenly there is a lockdown, and that what used to be 1,200, 1,500 came down to 250 per day. But the question is, among the 250, if there are 10, 15 or 20 are positive, and where to send these patients out? And trust me, it was really nightmare for me. And I'm staying in the campus. I used to get calls all over the night. This patient is positive, know what to do. Another important thing is I'd like to tell you directly, it's very difficult to manage the intellectual people. Managing the doctors is really difficult. They, fight in such a way saying that, no, see, I'm exposed to this. Where will I go? What about my family? You provide a ward in the hospital. How can I provide a ward in the hospital in a cancer setup? It's an immunocompromised setup. And I used to request my close friends outside, please give him a place for quarantine. And the patient is tested positive. We don't know. He has to wait for about initial days. It was more 8 to 10 days, and later on they reduce the quarantine period. Like that, it has given me a courage to start the RT-PCR test. Trust me, there is an outsourced lab for advanced molecular oncology. Against all odds, I called the molecular biology, the lab owners. It was outsourced to them through a tender. They said, sir, if you give me courage, I'll start. And today, 11 lakh samples are tested in the department. This is the highest in the country, probably by one lab. And today I handle about nearly 50 to 60% of BBMP samples. Even today, I get on an average 10 to 14,000 samples today. But the number of positive cases have come down. In addition to that, I started a kiosk for testing the COVID. And this problem is, who is going to build the cat? The staff nurses are not ready. No, I don't know how to take a swab. Trust me, I used to go and tell. I used to wear a mask and shield. No, this is how we have to take a swab. It's no big deal. Head and neck oncology, you take every day, test the throat. No, this is how it happens. No, he says, no, sir, I have a small kid. I have a aged mother. I can't do it. I said, no, I called the people, everybody. I had every 3 days, I used to conduct meeting with all the faculty. And I used to tell them, look, this is something which is new. And as a health warriors, we have to face this problem. We can't go back and think your own kith and kin is positive. What will you do? The whole society, you can't blame the government. Government, how can they take a responsibility? Every individual has to contribute. That is one problem in this country I faced. This so-called as one is the educated, another is the uneducated. The semi-educated people are the worst people, I tell you. And they never listen. Even today, majority of the people actually, they're not testing. People who actually, what I noticed was, people who have cold and cough, they made a one-to-one, they call up. I said, no, don't go to the doctor, man. They will test COVID positive and they will charge you the 3 lakh, 5 lakhs and self-medication. They go to this, very much available in India. You go to any pharmacy, they'll give a paracetamol and antibiotic and you'll keep on spreading. So you said about second wave. Where is the question of second wave and the first wave is not ended? The actual people are not testing. Because of compulsion, they're testing now. Wherever the hospital admission is there, wherever the treatment is required, wherever the college admissions are required, wherever the attendance is required, because of compulsion, they're testing. Otherwise, the actual positive people are not testing, many of them. No doubt, the incidence has come down. And then I've created a ward, everything, and I made it a point that, COVID positive patients only will be treated outside and COVID negative patients will be treated with routine tests. And trust me, not even one day I closed the hospital, such a big hospital. I managed. The worst thing I faced was, these patients you test COVID, ask them to come tomorrow. They will not go out. I have a dharmashala. Somehow they squeeze into the dharmashala and among the 50 people, one will come positive. What will I do with the 50 people? What will I do with the ward? Then again, shift there, here, there, some people will run away and the BBMP people will come. What happened to this? I said, no, doctor, you should take responsibility. How can I take responsibility? They'll jump the compound and go out. And the moment you tell that BBMP people are coming, they'll run away. And the next thing was, the worst thing was that the arranging an ambulance. I had some contact at the BBMP doctors level, somehow I could manage. Sometimes, when I don't intervene, you ask for an ambulance today, tomorrow evening it will come. What will happen to the COVID positive patient? in the ward, sitting in the ward, he's spreading to everybody. And these people not keep quiet, they keep on walking everywhere. And you need to keep a security guard. So these are all some strange incidences I've gone through. With all this, I published an article how a regional cancer institute had coped up during this time, how many surgeries are done, how many radiotherapy, chemotherapy, how many palliative care are done. And mine is one of the highest number of cases treated during this pandemic. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ramchandra. I think I'll quickly go to Shashank and ask a question. How did the Tata Memorial manage, Shashank? If you are still there, I saw you walking around.
Yeah, I'm very much there.
Yeah, you are a part of the the Mumbai Municipal this one task force, etc. How did Tata Memorial manage the cancer patients?
So I think let us be couple of things very clear that whether you test for COVID or you don't test for COVID, you need to take universal precautions, because you know that even if somebody is RT-PCR positive, it is only 70%. 30% of the time you are going to have that. Whether it was cancer care, whether it was kidney disease care or dialysis, I was involved with Maharashtra, whole Maharashtra, and Tata Cancer or dialysis with the Mumbai Nephrology Group. They had clearly put a protocol in place. And with that protocol, they were able to sufficiently manage and segregate. Now, I completely agree with Dr. Ramchandra that there are challenges right from all the healthcare workers, but they were mitigated to a great extent. And you know that wherever possible in the month of March, so if you see this whole pandemic has its own eras. So, March, April, May was very different from June, July, and August. And it was very different from September, October, and November. So if I span it over these 3 months, each of those 3 months were managed differently by various hospitals, including Tata, including Lilavati, Hinduja, all the hospitals, because everybody has a different setup, COVID setup, non-COVID setup, and a intermediate setup, which is like a step care setup. And also each one had a different ability to pick up positive and negatives, like antigen test came much later, and that became a very easy screen tool. Now most people in the emergency room now use antigen, but cancer care was not stopped. And in fact, they have even written letters in NEGM, like Dr. Badwe, who's head of Tata Cancer. But everything continued. What was mandatory, what was desirable and essential, continued at centers like ATRAC, which are there in Navi Mumbai. So what was mandatory and whatever had to be done was done. What was ambulatory was different. So hospital care continued as it is. And if COVID was positive, they were treated appropriately. If COVID was negative, they were treated for their cancer care. The COVID had to be sorted out. It was sorted out. I don't think there was a challenge. Barrier to therapy was not there, but the degree of difficulty was very huge. And it was more of a administrative issue. I don't think there was more of a medical issue in that.
I think
And
so.
I
That's
think
right.
in the second cycle and the third cycle, in the second 3 months and the third 3 months, what happened is newer therapies became available. Whether you like it or not, remdesivir made a challenge and a difference. Early institution of therapy of plasma made a difference. Tata had one of the best blood banks. So if you were able to use convalescent plasma early, remdesivir early in the cancer patients and the chemotherapy patients, the quality of care despite of COVID did not suffer. So I think something which you need to know that in the first 3 months, which was March, April, and May, we had challenges. And those problems were exactly what Dr. Ramchandra alluded to. In the second 3 months, we were on a learning curve and we had availability of some plasma and remdesivir with us, used early. And in the third 3 months, I think we have gone into a maturity curve. And now as we enter December, I think we are quite confident of handling COVID and non-COVID care both. So whether it is a cancer space, dialysis space, or any other space, I think we are in a better footing to handle it from a healthcare standpoint. The only problem is if there is so-called peak which people are fearing, then there could be challenges. But I don't really foresee that as a major issue unless and until the healthcare infrastructure gets overburdened. And that's something which we need to be mindful and mitigate it.
Thank you, Shashank, for that. Let me go to Sanjay Pujari. Sanjay, Shashank mentioned about remdesivir and protocols being working right now. Recently, there were also articles and publication that remdesivir actually did not really work. The protocols are different. Some cases are extremely mild, some are asymptomatic, some are moderate, some are severe. They said only elderly and patients with comorbid conditions and diabetes would get into the problems. we saw the entire spectrum, mild, moderate, severe, asymptomatic, some doing extremely well, some doing badly. Uh, I mean, what is this virus? Are there different strains? I mean, why is it effective? Is it only about the immune system or the virus strain itself is playing a role here?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. Uh, I think by now we have been far ahead in understanding the pathophysiology of the disease. So the first 7 to 10 days is where viral replication is the major driver of clinical problems, and subsequently an aberrant inflammatory immune response sets in after day 7, which leads to a different kind of clinical presentation leading to severity of the disease. Now, uh, that is now very clear. So you need to target with different interventions at different time points. And that is what Shashank was mentioning about the role of antiviral. So when you understand the pathophysiology, you would understand that perhaps antivirals will work if you initiate them early, whether those antivirals are drugs or antibodies, either given through plasma or monoclonal antibodies, which are already approved in the US for treatment. Later on, after days 7 to 8, you have a aberrant hyperinflammatory immune response, and you need anti-inflammatory drugs or mediators of inflammation like interleukin inhibitors and things like that. So we have thrown everything into the sink trying to salvage patients. But the very important learning lesson that we have had as science is that perception and evidence are two different things. So perception is that this works, but when you put it in an RCT, you realize that in a controlled environment, it doesn't really perform well. So coming to remdesivir, for instance, remdesivir, we should remember, is not a miracle drug. No trial has shown remdesivir to reduce mortality. So mortality benefit is not there. So then you look at secondary outcomes. You look at time to recovery. And that is where the ACT-1 trial, which is a randomized placebo-controlled trial, showed that it reduces the time. The full data is now published in the New England, where they showed that it was the time to recovery in the remdesivir group was 10 days versus 15 days in the placebo arm. While you see the Solidarity trial, there are design problems. Solidarity was published in the current issue of New England Journal, where they did not demonstrate even time to recovery benefit. But of course, the problem with Solidarity is it's a very heterogeneous population. Though it's a pragmatic trial, you can't really standard of care varies across sites. 38 countries participated, so it's a quite a heterogeneous population. So right now, the role for remdesivir is earlier on in patients who need low flow oxygen. It would benefit in terms of time to clinical recovery. If you look at international guidelines, they don't recommend remdesivir in mechanically ventilated patients. It's too far ahead. Antivirals will not act in that context. So right now we are using remdesivir predominantly, and understand remdesivir is an expensive drug as well. So we need to target it early, and we need to really use it when in the small population who needs low flow oxygen. In patients with non-invasive ventilation, high flow nasal oxygen, invasive ventilation, it doesn't, in that subgroup, it doesn't really benefit as much. So what is the importance of the secondary outcome? Time to clinical recovery will be important if we want to send patients earlier home and make vacancy for beds for other patients. So it has more of a public health benefit in terms of, apart from patient benefit, a public health benefit of trying to empty beds. And that is where the US is looking up today. You see in US, 200,000 new cases every day and 3,000 deaths every day. So they need a health care infrastructure to really cope with this, and that is the reason why uh, that is where you position really remdesivir.
Thank you, Sanjay Pujari. Let me ask Anup a question now. Anup, you're from Delhi. You know that's the capital of the country. Initially, when there was lockdown, there was a lot of criticism that this probably the lockdown was not even necessary. People are just, I mean, the government is doing it just to buy some time and things like that. Do you think the lockdown actually helped to prepare the healthcare industry so that we were aware of what we have or we don't have? Same question I will ask Dr. Ramchandra. Did the lockdown really help administrator to kind of get an idea of what we have? Anup?
Uh, yeah, lockdown served a couple of purposes. Some people say that it's entirely useless and there shouldn't have been any lockdown, and we would have done similarly without it. But that lockdown, number one, put some sort of a discipline in people's mind. That we have to be aware of social distancing. We have to wear masks, and there is a virus going around which can kill. Otherwise, the people were saying, "Oh, it's just another influenza" and things like that. So that prepared people's mind. And second thing is that prepared administrators for what lies ahead, although they did not see that this much problem at that time. Things were going up very slowly, a couple, 10 to 20 cases a day and things like that. But some preparation was started, and also at the same time, some research also started. ICMR became active, and all the capacity for testing also was augmented. So, so from multiple angles, it made some point. But if you ask me whether it really decreased the number of people, total number of people infected, I can't say that it was that effective or something like that. Or another lockdown will be similarly effective. But yes, as Shashank said very clearly, that the basic precaution, which has not been taken by most of the people. I go out in the morning, walk, and 50% of the people have mask below the chin, and 10% are not wearing mask at all. And that's right in the morning. And I keep on telling them, and they get angry as if I have said something which is wrong. So the basic responsibility of all the people should be at least take these precautions. That has not been done. At Delhi, everybody is crowding at every place now. That is something which is making the difference and putting Delhi at the hot spot of COVID-19 at the moment.
That's sad to hear. Dr. Ramchandra, when there was a lockdown and then when you people had time, as a director of Kidwai, as an administrator, as the boss, how did you utilize this time? What went into the thinking? Was it introspection of the facilities that you have at the institute? How was the time spent?
In fact, lockdown brought in, as Dr. Anup told clearly, it brought in a lot of discipline. Number one, as an administrator, I had enough time to plan myself. Like the number of cases came down from 1,500 to 250, 200, 300, like that. So what I did was I used to conduct regular meetings with all the doctors and nurses. I segregated, like today, tomorrow, somebody comes, and you can come in shifts. So I distributed and kept a backup team. Suppose, okay, so today you've done a surgery, suddenly, that patient turns positive. That team need not come for 1 week or 2 weeks. So I already had a backup time. That breathing time was actually only because of lockdown. And another thing was because of lockdown, this country, majority, especially in a country like India, people are very indisciplined. They won't wash their hands, they won't use sanitizer, they won't wear masks. And this is very commonly I'm saying. So this has brought in some discipline with the lockdown, and the first lockdown was really effective. Honestly, in fact, it has actually brought in a lot of discipline, and it gave time to think. A lot of people, especially for me, it was really beneficial.
Thank you. Shashank, of late you become very philosophical, and then we do see some of the messages that comes from you. Dr. Ramchandran and Dr. Anup Mishra said that people in India are careless and not disciplined. What goes on in the mind? I mean, is it an attitude or is it the behavior? Is it peculiar to Indians? What is happening to the mind?
No, I think it's being a very uncharitable for you to say that Indians are peculiar. I think human behavior is same all over the world, and you have seen this in United States. And I think what has happened really is that people have become reckless. People have become, got out of this COVID fatigue. I completely agree with Anup that people just don't want to mask, and they have become, instead of being careful and guarded and appropriate. See, what are the simple things we need? We just need masking, physical distancing, sanitizations, avoid crowds, and don't go into poorly ventilated environment. Those are the simple 5 COVID appropriate behavior. We need COVID appropriate habit: eat on time, sleep for 8 hours, do a digital detox, which are COVID appropriate habits. Now, neither are we following any appropriate behavior, nor are we doing an appropriate, habit. And beyond that, if you are symptomatic, you are not testing. So for the every day which you delay testing, you will spread to others. And beyond that, if you test, most people now have actually started a very dangerous trend. They don't test, they go a CT scan, they start treatment without testing, which is very, very bad. So the exposure is very high. But I think the reckless behavior is a mindset issue. And it is the responsibility of the citizens of the country, and we have to convince them. See, changing human behavior is an art. And I think we just can't force it. I think coercion has not worked. Yes, lockdown helped us to the healthcare infrastructure to get prepared, to it allowed us to get organized. India is a country where we need a little bit of danda, but we also need a little bit of a behavioral change. And I don't agree that Indians are, as bad as others. I think Europeans and US have done far worse than us.
Worse
And I
than
think, and I think we have got a little better immune system. So we have recovered better. We have had a lower case fatality rate, and our exposure is pretty large. So I think, but I think a behavioral change is in the order. And I think behavioral change is something which needs not philosophy, nor danda. I think it needs a golden mean. I think it needs for each individual to feel that what they are doing is appropriate or not. What
Thank
has
you.
happened is in all pandemics from 14th century, a lot of crap gets spread out. You have WhatsApp University, you have Google University, and we are talking here as domain experts. I have known Sanjay for 2.5 decades. He has spent his lifetime in infectious diseases, but they will not listen to Dr. Sanjay Pujari. They will go to another, quack who will talk some crap, and they get carried away by all these messages. So I think the right messaging, awareness, public behavior change is an art. And I think from that standpoint, I think our Prime Minister made an effort. Our chief ministers of every state have made some efforts, but the doctors have to be the papa figures. They need to make a change with all our other class. And I think behavioral change is possible. I don't think it is not possible. And I agree with Anup that people need that responsibility. And any time people have broken the challenges, we have seen a peak happening, whichever may be the city. It's COVID and coronavirus. Okay, not only is predictably unpredictable, but it loves to enter your house. If you give it an entry, it is just waiting to get in there. So I think it is for us to draw that Lakshman Rekha. And I think Indians have done reasonably well, but they could have done better.
Thanks. Sanjay, you had something to say, then I'll go to Banshi after Sanjay.
Just two quick points. One is that, of course, public individual behavior is important, but in India is a very vast country with structural problems. So you have households which are filled with people, you have migrant workers, even if you are going to give them a message, the environment is not conducive to follow these kind of messages. The second point I want to mention is now it is quite clearly, as far as transmission dynamics is concerned, that corona is a super spreading kind of a phenomena. So if we have super spreading events, 20% of people contribute to 80% of transmissions. And that is the reason why the most important thing is avoiding crowded settings. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing now is it's a marriage season in India. And people are getting, close. That is where the transmission is going to happen. Super spreading events are going to happen there. We have to be more careful there.
Okay. Banshi, let me come to you. I mean, you are the president of RSSDI. You had protocols written, you had guidelines written, you had a lot of webinars and things like that. But even you had problems in Ahmedabad getting the patients because there was a fear among the patients. How did you get the patients back? I mean, what do you tell the patients to get out of that fear?
So first of all, thanks, Dr. Arvind, for inviting me and joining for this wonderful program. And I'm really enjoying listening Dr. Shashank and Dr. Sanjay Pujari, and understanding more about the COVID every time when I listen Sanjay and Shashank particularly. So my patients, if you ask me, actually to get the patient face-to-face consultation is really almost like 1/3 of the patients now what I'm seeing. I used to see more than 60 patients per day before COVID time, and now it is less than 20 patients. Maybe from my clinic also, we also try to restrict the number of patients because of social distancing, which we want to maintain during the consultation period. But at the same time, now we are too busy to take care of these patients on telephone, and it's like teleconsultation, not exactly the meaning of telemedicine or teleconsultation or doing a video consultation. And in last 2-3 months, the number of consultation on telephone is increased exponentially because of use of steroid in our diabetic patients. And during COVID time, now almost as Sanjay was talking, like each and every patient now they are putting on the steroids. And what is happening, even now primary care physicians are also started writing the steroid to all their patients, even when they suspect the patients of COVID. So that has increased the number of patients with a severe steroid-induced hyperglycemia. And that has increased the workload on telephone. To get the patients on a regular follow-up, we are not asking them. Once in a year is fine if the patient is coming to us on regular basis, but as a tertiary care center, but we are not asking each and every patient to come to us for every 1 or 2 months. And during this COVID period, even patient asks for a consultation. First, we ask that, what is the issue, why you want to come? And if it is related to like a food problem or something very specific or some acute problem, say just now a patient sitting outside, in between her sugar had come, random sugar is 740. So I mean, that type of patient will definitely would like to come and see you immediately. And there are patients, it's really difficult sometimes to explain the patients on a basal bolus therapy or 3 times short acting insulin, or to explain the patient on a video consultation that how he has to take, how he or she has to take insulin injection. And particularly when in acute situation, when patient, even the relatives are not helping the patient, at that point of time here, it is more difficult to consult the patients on video and to teach the patient about the different aspect of the diabetes therapy.
Thank you, Vanshi. Anup, you have been writing a lot about new onset diabetes itself in the post-COVID era. And the COVID virus itself seems to be damaging the beta cells. And we do see amylase levels going up, lipases going up, not settling down. They're requiring insulin for long periods of time. Initially, we thought elderly diabetics have a low immunity. Your thoughts on diabetes and COVID, Anu?
Uh, that's a very interesting area. People have not been able to understand it fully. But whatever we have studied, and we have just submitted a paper on new onset diabetes just today itself, what we have seen is that there are a couple of kinds of diabetes which are going on. Number one, patients who are already diabetic and under the stress of COVID, fever, steroids, and things like that, their diabetes became more severe and was detected in the hospital. So they were already probably diabetic and it became. The second kind of patients are those who had pre-diabetes earlier. They knew probably, or some didn't know, and it rapidly got converted into diabetes and high diabetes too. So that is the second kind of patient. Third kind of patient was non-diabetic totally. And the new diabetes started with COVID-19 infection. Now, just 2 days back, Arvind, one very interesting patient came. He didn't have very severe diabetes, which we associate with the new onset diabetes, that, the virus is doing something to the body to increase blood sugar. This patient had just 2 days of mild fever, and a thin patient, non-obese patient, 35-year-old. And on fourth day, somebody said, you get your blood sugar tested, and it was 500. So this kind of thing is actually a pure new onset diabetes. Now, what may be happening in such situation is that virus may be attacking the pancreatic beta cells and temporarily decreasing the insulin secretion, destroying a couple of cells, may be causing a mild type of pancreatitis. Severe pancreatitis is not very often seen, but mild type of pancreatitis. And these people, some may manifest with just high sugar, and others may manifest with diabetic ketoacidosis, which is very, very severe type of situation where almost the beta cell function is close to zero. Now, in my friend Shafi from Medanta recently in our journal published 2 patients with diabetic ketoacidosis, not previously known to have diabetes. Now, the interesting part, Arvind, is that many of these people who are where diabetes is starting today with COVID, they are recovering also. And their sugars, which were previously not even controlled with high doses of insulin, the insulin was stopped. It controlled also on the oral diabetic drugs, and sometimes it's nothing is needed later on. This is what Dr. Shafiq Kuche found, that initially diabetic ketoacidosis, within 6 weeks, all insulin gone, just on oral drugs, very well controlled. So whatever is occurring is possibly transient. It's not a permanent situation. Permanent will be only those who are already diabetic, not discovered, and increased diabetic with steroids, and then continued with diabetes.
Thank you, Anup. Let me now quickly go to Anju Batni. Anju Batni is an immunologist, and then she's been doing a lot of work with rapid testing kits. Okay, and then she's also working on plant origin of drugs for virus. We know a number of the drugs that we use today are also plant origin, and she's working on antivirals of plant origin. Anju, you can tell something about your work, and then if you want to share the slides, you can definitely share the slides.
No, I don't have any slides as such. That's fine.
Right.
I can just talk about it. We are just a small startup in Bangalore, and we have a cheminformatics-based platform. So it's basically a computer simulation of sorts where we do drug designing. And based on this platform, we look for small molecules of natural origin, of plant origin, for various disease conditions. Most of them are inflammation-driven disease conditions. So we already have a portfolio of plant-based molecules for various skin diseases, because that's the area we started with, because topicals are easier to get through and to put out in the market. And we are a small startup, so we need to generate revenue as soon as we can. But we are now diversifying into other disease conditions like pain management and hypercholesterolemia and so on. And in the last 10 months, we've been concentrating on COVID because we received a lot of government grants. So our the first thing that we started with was look in our bioinformatics platform. So we have an in-house in silico library of plant molecules. And these are over 5 lakh molecules in various combinations. So we screen these molecules for these viral targets, mostly the very, very famous spike protein, the RDRP, which targets, it's the same molecule that is targeted by remdesivir. It's the viral protein called RDRP. So we looked for molecules of plant origin that also target RDRP, spike protein, and so on. And we were working in collaboration with the Regional Center for Biotechnology, because we do not have a BSL level 3 facility to screen, do any sort of screening, whether with in vitro or in vivo. So we worked together with the regional center in Delhi, and they did all the in vitro screening for us. So out of the 25 odd molecules that we picked, isolated from plant sources, purified, tested, and sent to them, quite a few molecules came back with very good antiviral activity. And the comparison, the gold standard, all these were compared to was remdesivir. And so now we have completed, we've just completed a phase 1 trial after completing toxicity studies. And now we have a ethical committee meeting coming up next week in Delhi for a phase 2, a multicentric phase 2 trial. So that's what we're doing.
I mean, how are you doing this phase 2 trials? I mean, these are the human trials, and what type of patients are chosen? What is the design?
So, our patients are not critical. So they either present mild or mild to moderate symptoms. And our medication is given oral along with standard of care.
And the standard of care being remdesivir?
No, the standard of care, whatever is required for their condition.
Okay.
As determined by the physician, the hospital, wherever they are admitted, if at all they are admitted.
I mean, this is very interesting. Antivirals of plant origin, if it sees the light of the day, that's going to be great. I mean, I request Anup, Shashank, and Sanjay. Any questions to Anju Bhatti, because she's the immunologist here? Yes, Anup.
Yeah, there are a couple of recent studies I'm sure you're aware of with. One is the अनार का जो छिलका होता है, there are two compounds from there which have a good antiviral activity. So I hope you are going to conduct some trials on that.
Yes, yes, we do work with Anarka Chilka. Yes, but at
Right.
present, whatever molecules we are working with for what have tested positive so far, what we've done in clinical trials are not from that, but we certainly do work with those as well.
Then there is the one randomized controlled trial from Pakistan which is published today where honey has been used. Of course, we have a lot of contaminated honey, as has been recently shown in the newspaper. But if you take the honey, is there any truth in that? Honey has an antiviral property.
So I know that bee venom is used a lot, and it has a lot of anti-inflammatory properties, and a lot of medication is already in the market. All these herbal concoctions which use bee venom, but as such, honey as such, I have not heard of so
So
far.
go through this trial, Pakistan randomized control trial.
Yeah. Anju, let me also ask you a question.
How different oral antiviral are doing in RCT, like favipiravir or the combinations of different oral antiviral drugs, which
I'm sorry,
were
I didn't hear the first part of your question. Sorry.
different oral antiviral drugs are doing in different randomized control trial. Do they have similar type of data or the remdesivir is having, or any other? Are they better or they are not of any use?
So far, there is not. I haven't seen too much data on too many orals that are being tested right now. Clinical trial data.
So on what basis the different antivirals, oral antivirals, and this ivermectin and azithromycin and doxycyclines are used? I mean, if we don't have any RCTs or if we don't have any data.
No. So there a lot of drugs. You're talking about drugs that are being repurposed. So for them, there is a lot of data against other very closely related viral diseases. So, for instance, against other coronaviruses, they have been found to be effective in a lot of clinical trials against very similarly related coronaviruses, which is why they are being repurposed for testing against COVID. And a lot of tests are being done with these repurposed. And ivermectin, for one, has given very good results.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've put that study in the chat box. Please go through that.
Yeah, I think we'll look into that. I mean, there is a question. Maybe Sanjay Pujari can take this, or probably Anup or anybody can take this question. Somebody has asked a question. Bamlanivimab is a drug where the EU denied it in India, and what is the opinion from expert in this panel? Why was this denied in India? I mean, any idea? Can anybody answer that question? I don't have an answer. It's in the Q&A. Yes, Sanjay.
Yeah, so this is a monoclonal antibody, and this is something which works very earlier on. There is a randomized control trial which was conducted. It's not still published, but it was conducted in the US, where it shows you need to initiate it within 2 to 3 days of onset of symptoms, and usually given in mild disease. It failed in severe disease. So these are monoclonal antibodies which are artificially produced, manufactured, unlike convalescent plasma which you derive from donors. So this is very expensive. Need to be given IV, and even in the US there is a lot of arguments or things like that. The controversies going around this. They have approved it for use, but we don't know which population, because we know that 85% of mild illness recover on their own. So the real key question today in COVID is which are the patients who progress? What are the predictions we can develop for identifying that a person coming to your clinic today is going to progress to severe disease? And then how to prevent that progression. So the key question in COVID-19 management is that. The other aspect about these repurposed drugs, I would like to just mention, there are RCTs for many of these repurposed drugs now. So let me summarize it very clearly in few statements. Hydroxychloroquine with or without azithromycin, done and dusted, not useful. Ivermectin, not useful. There is one retrospective study called the, I think, ICON trial, where it didn't show, where it did show some benefit, but that has a lot of problems. So ivermectin is not useful. The concentrations required for antiviral activity in situ, in vivo, is much higher than the current recommended dose for use of ivermectin. Doxycycline, done and dusted. Tocilizumab, done and dusted almost. So all these drugs, favipiravir, there is one trial published recently from Mumbai, from Glenmark in, I think, International Journal of Infectious Disease. It was an RCT with a lot of problems. It failed in its primary endpoint of reduction of viral load. But then the authors say that, it reduced time to clinical cure in 3 days, but at 5 days, everybody was similar. So the amount, you have to take it for 14 days, and the cost, and we really don't know. 30% of asymptomatic patients were treated in that trial. So at present, at least in my practice until now, I have not used favipiravir. I have not used any of these repurposed drugs. Use remdesivir in the category that I mentioned, and use dexamethasone only in patients who need respiratory support. Don't use dexamethasone for everybody, because in patients who do not need respiratory support, it can cause harm. So this is the crux of management of COVID today.
One question to you. Colchicine has been shown to decrease inflammation and decrease mortality in randomized 8 days randomized trial.
So colchicine was, there is I think a Lancet publication which showed
JAMA publication.
JAMA publication, which is a phase 2 trial. It's a hypothesis driven trial. So it's not a phase 3 trial. So we need, it may be promising, but we need further evidence in phase 3 trials.
Okay, I think I'll come to the hot question that people have been thinking about, and this is today's paper, Deccan Herald in Bangalore. 3 crore Indians to get COVID vaccination. Sanjay Pujari, Shashank, I would like to see your faces at this point of time. Sanjay, where are we with the vaccines today? Can you summarize vaccines? 1.3 billion people. How is government planning to do, and where are we? None, people are talking about vaccines coming by the 25th of December, but none have even been placed for DCGI approval so far. And ICMR today, they have said we have nothing to do with the vaccines. It's the DCGI who has to take the call. All about vaccines, Sanjay.
Yeah, so let me put a very broad picture. Global India. Globally, we all know there are 2 vaccines. Pfizer's vaccine, which is famous now. It's an mRNA vaccine approved in the UK and Bahrain today. The other is Moderna also, which is an mRNA vaccine. These 2 vaccines are unlikely to be very useful in the India, because it needs a minus 80 degrees refrigeration. So essentially distribution is going to be, storing and distribution is going to be a big problem. And obviously this need 2 doses of the vaccine, 3 to 4 weeks apart. And this is a prime boost strategy. That's what we call a prime boost strategy. And these are expensive. I think Pfizer vaccine is costing $20 per dose. So India can't afford that. So the next group of platforms are virus vector vaccine. So adenovirus vector vaccine, and we know Oxford vaccine, AstraZeneca collaboration, and Serum Institute in India is manufacturing it, and they have already invested and they have a stockpile already. The problem with the AstraZeneca vaccine was they came out with, let me give you a caveat. This is all press releases. So there are no publications. We need to see hard data. The efficacy claimed by mRNA vaccine is 95%. Russian vaccine and Oxford vaccines are 2 vaccines which are adenovirus vector based vaccines. They are also claiming 90%, 95% efficacy. But the Oxford vaccine, you must have read in popular press that for the first 3,000 patients, they gave a half dose, the first dose, and subsequently after 4, inadvertently, which in a phase 3 international trial, they did it in UK and Brazil, is quite surprising. So transparency is very important in sharing results, doing studies. It's quite political. We know that everybody wants to be the leader in trying to get a vaccine to the population. Safety, we really are looking at safety for these vaccines only in the short term. So remember, all these vaccines We don't know what is the duration of protection, because these vaccines have been studied for not more than 3 to 4 months, and we don't know what is the long-term safety. So it looks like Oxford vaccine, as because in India, Serum is conducting trial in 1,600 patients and looking at the safety aspect of it, and they have a stockpile. So looks like they are going to, once the trial results are over, apply it to the DCGI and try to get a emergency use authorization for rolling it out. So look at that is the closest. Sputnik 5, which is the Russian vaccine, they are doing clinical trials with Dr. Reddy's laboratories. So that is just rolling out. So we will have to wait for some data. Remember, all these vaccines need to be safe and show some kind of efficacy in your population, in the Indian population. And that is the reason why indigenous trials are needed. And these all six or eight candidates in India are in various phases of clinical trials. So it is exciting, but at the same time, we should be wary about trying to look at data. Should be cautiously optimistic about this.
Okay, one quick question. It's kind of a rapid fire. I think Anup had a question. Anup, you can ask the question, then we'll go for the rapid fire later on.
Very, very quick question. What kind of efficacy would you expect or to when you authorize the vaccine to be rolled out to the whole population? 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%?
Yeah, so we don't know exactly what is the cutoff, but the US FDA or the European Union have kept a cutoff of 50%, but then we have the 95% confidence interval around that point estimate. So they go as low down as to 30%. So the lower limit is 30% that they may accept, but 50% seems to be a good ballpark figure as a point estimate. But these vaccines have been 90% effective. So this is remarkable achievement.
Yeah, let me ask a question to Anju. I asked the same thing. Anju, when they talk of 90% efficacy, 96%, 80%, how are they measuring this? Are they measuring the antibodies? And how often are they measuring the antibodies? And what should be the level of antibodies? Because doctors want to know how exactly this is measured and told that it's 90%. What is it that they are measuring?
I think a vaccine generally will elicit both a B cell as well as a T cell response.
Okay.
So you will get both antibodies as well as you will get memory B cells as well as memory T cells. So I am not exactly aware what is being tested, what is being looked for in each of these trials. That I am not aware of.
Sanjay.
I think Sanjay has.
Yeah, so the immunogenicity, as Anju mentioned, is tested in phase 2 trials. So in phase 2 trials, they measure the T cell response and the neutralizing antibody response. And that has been done. Now, phase 3 trial actually is large population-based studies. 30,000, 40,000 patients in the Moderna and the Pfizer study, and even in the Oxford, about 12,000 patients. They actually measure illness. So there are two groups of patients, two groups of normal people who are randomized. So you have one group which receives placebo and other group which receives the vaccine, 2 doses of the vaccine. And they measure after the second dose, they have a follow-up period where they look at illness. So if they have a respiratory illness, they test for the COV2. And if they are coming positive, then they will label it as a case of COVID-19. So in both these vaccines, there is 95% efficacy, or 90% efficacy means 90% people developed less illness in the vaccine group as compared to the placebo group. So these are hard numbers of patients in this group. What it doesn't measure is asymptomatic infection, except Oxford vaccine has been doing RT-PCR tests every week in their vaccine and the placebo population, and they also showed a response in that. So they reduce illness. The efficacy is reduction in illness. And Oxford vaccine also came out with data saying that, again, press release, that they are also reducing severity of illness. So less patients in the vaccine group developed severe illness as compared to the placebo group. So clinical outcomes, it's not based on immunogenicity, but clinical outcomes are measured.
Thanks. Thanks, Sanjay. I think we'll go for the rapid round now. I think I will start with Shashank and Sanjay in the rapid round here. RT-PCR was thought to be the gold standard, and that was what everybody used. And then we realized that RT-PCR is only sensitive to an extent of 57%. Then they spoke of just the symptoms. RT-PCR can be negative. Then rapid antigen test came, antibody test came, then the CT test came. And we know that there are a huge number of people who are asymptomatic. So today, what is the test that you believe, Shashank, and then Sanjay? Sanjay, you can start. Shashank will join us.
Yes, so testing of a patient is always based on presentation, history, and that adds to the positive predictive value of a test. Even if a test is low sensitive, if you are able to have a patient who is a contact of a household, who's having clinical illness similar to a respiratory illness, COVID-19, then even a test with lower sensitivity has a higher positive predictive value. So right now, the algorithm from ICMR is that if you have a symptomatic patient, you do a rapid antigen test. If it is positive, it has a high specificity, it confirms infection. If it is negative, you do a RT-PCR test. And then if the patient is negative on an RT-PCR, then you would follow that patient up, and maybe if the patient develops clinical symptoms later on, you can repeat that test. So this is a simple algorithm: screening with rapid antigen and confirmation, and those who are negative but have a high possibility of having a COVID, you do an RT-PCR.
Okay, when do we actually see the first vaccine rolling out? What is the likely time? When is it going to be available to an Indian vaccine? What is the real timeline from today?
In India or global?
In India.
In India, it's very tough to predict. We will be awaiting the Serum Institute data, 1600 patient trial data, and that would be submitted to EU to the DCGI, and for an emergency use. I think December, maybe 3rd or last week, they may be able to have some data to be submitted to the DCGI. After that, DCGI committee will look into it and then decide on whether it can be given emergency use authorization. Remember, it can't be given an approval right away. It will be an emergency use authorization.
New Year, sir. New Year.
New Year. Shashank, one quick question, if you are still there. Second wave. Are we going to see the second wave, or we are not going to see the second wave?
I think Shashank is not there.
Shashank is not there. Dr. Ramchandran has also left because he had to go somewhere. Anup
is gone to take care of second wave.
I know, it's the second wave. Anup, are we going to see the second wave?
Yeah, Arvind, we are in Delhi. We are already in the second wave, and the first wave went down a little, and then came up again. And I can tell you, in Delhi there will be a third wave also. The way the behavior of the people in Delhi is, but it will be spreading in the areas where it is not covered as yet. So suburban areas where it is not the density of the coronavirus is still not there. So those will be the hot spots in the future, and then subsequently in the villages also. So there'll be a third wave, depending, unless there is a vaccine in January which covers 100% of this population, or at least those vulnerable, and has an efficacy which will protect people by 90%, 95%, then we are not going to see a third wave.
Okay. Anju, post your phase 1, phase 2 trial of your antiviral herbal agents, how confident are you that they will probably have a drug for coronavirus which is plant-based?
So our antiviral, if it gets through the second phase 2 trial, it will go to Ayush for approval. So we are fairly confident that we will get through Ayush for sure.
Okay.
So initially it will be launched through Ayush.
But I want to ask you regarding the herd immunity. If suppose the waves are there and it is spreading in the way and everyone is getting infected, what about the herd immunity? How you can confirm as by getting the IgG antibody of the community? Is there any studies going on that how many of them are already positive? At least those who are high-risk professionals, those who are working in hospitals, COVID hospitals. Is there any studies going on or have done a IgG antibody of a mass?
I don't think it has been done. I mean, unless Anup and Sanjay are aware of it. I mean, are they?
No,
Yeah,
no,
so
ICMR data, I'm sure Sanjay will fill me up on that, but ICMR data are clearly times they have tested here. First time it was 27% positivity of antibody, and second time also it was something like similar, but Sanjay can fill in. So one third of the population has antibody, but that doesn't matter. Now these antibodies, whether they are going to really fight it, they were going to fade, there will be going to be a second infection or not, we don't know. Sanjay.
yeah, so the serosurveillance, these are called serosurveillance, and this has been done twice by ICMR. The first serosurveillance. In this, you should remember there is a sample of population. You can't test everybody, so you pick up samples which are representative of a community. So you have rural, urban, and then you have within urban areas slum and non-slum. So you'll have in different geographic regions different seroprevalences. You will not have a universal seroprevalence, but roughly it looks like we have not had a high seroprevalence, around 10 to 15% of seroprevalence of IgG antibodies. And as Dr. Anup mentioned, we don't know the significance of this. These are just IgG antibodies. They don't necessarily mean you have neutralizing antibodies. We don't know the duration of protection. And let me come with this wave thing. I think seeing a wave, a second wave or a third wave or whatever, is a function of your ability to test. If your people are not going to come and test themselves, and if there are limitations in getting testing access to your people, you are not going to get those numbers. What important waves we are interested in is hospital admissions and deaths, because those sick patients who are sick with a respiratory illness have to access care. And if you are able to see, and that is what you are seeing in Delhi, perhaps Dr. Anup can come in, that hospitals are again getting filled in. The ventilators shortages, ICU bed shortages, those are reflective of a wave. In general, rather than talking about total numbers, I think it should be hospital-based care access and death rates, which basically can be measured in a country like India more correctly than perhaps looking at population level screening and testing.
So Sanjay, like last 3 weeks, Ahmedabad is almost all hospitals are now packed, and we can say like second wave, and we have a lot of deaths also, and that is the reason. Still, there was a lockdown for 2 days, and now still after 9 p.m. there is a curfew in city of Ahmedabad.
Yeah.
So, what I mean to ask you that. Is it this second wave? We should call it the second wave, or is it just because there are no more number of patients were tested, or is it? Are we going to get settled down after this wave? Again, we'll go down, and then again we will be waiting for third wave.
That's why I said that testing is leave aside testing. If people are falling ill,
I mean, their hospitals are packed.
Yeah, hospitals are packed. Then certainly you should remember that the proportion of people outside who are not ill but infected is going to be high, and that proportion is falling ill and coming to you. So certainly it's a wave again, and this is because you have this festive season which came in between. You had so that will automatically within that incubation period cause a problem in terms of. But at the other end also is that there is a very interesting theory that if you start masking, and if people's compliance to masking is high, even if they are exposed to the virus, the proportion, the amount of virus, the viral load which goes in through the mask is less. And that is why you may be able to get mild illness, because your inoculum is less through a mask. So if compliance with mask has increased, and really if people are wearing it, like in my city, in Pune, we see a lot of people complying to masks. So you would not see that much waves happening. Sick patients coming in, though they may get infected, they may not be really sick. So in Pune, for example, we have this fear of a second wave, but it is not happening. We have closed our COVID wards.
That's great news. So, Banshi, when do you think a face-to-face conference will happen in the field of diabetology?
Already in ESD, the ESD meeting, they have
They made
decided
virtual.
not to do face-to-face, it is virtual. So probably the first meeting, which may or may not, we don't know, that will be IDF Bangkok. So
that's going to be what, another 1 year from now?
Yes, it is December 2021. That may happen. I don't know whether that will happen or not. So
what about RSSDI 20?
The next year RSSDI from India point of view, if we see in diabetes, the next year RSSDI is month of November. from Diabetes India, we have already taken the decision that this year, 2021, we are going to do on a virtual platform.
Virtual platform.
So I mean, Diabetes India, April is fine. So next year, 2022, Diabetes India, we are going to do face-to-face.
Thank you. Anju, before you go, a question not related to immunology. Who is going to win the next T20 match tomorrow? That's an interesting second T20 match. There is going to be no concussion clause happening tomorrow for the Indian cricket team. Who will win tomorrow's match?
India is playing, right?
India is playing Australia tomorrow.
Always India.
Oh, always India. Okay. I think with that, thank you so much. Shashank, we just quickly discuss the second wave, and then do you think it's going to happen, second, third wave? I mean, Sanjay beautifully explained what is this wave is all about. When do you see an end to this COVID? With that, we are going to close. I mean, you will make the closing remarks for today's discussion.
See, COVID is another virus. It will get converted into a chronically manageable acute disease, like any other common cold or flu. With vaccine on board, wave, probably we might get a second wave, probably a month and a half from now. We don't know whether it will be worse or milder, and we might even get a third wave. But I think vaccine is round the corner, and in a year and a half, we will still have to live with COVID. And after that, I think we'll be handling COVID much better. I think we are in better shape.
Better shape, I think. Thank you so very much, Shashank. Thank you, Anu. Thank you, Anju. Thank you, Banchi. Thank you, Sanjay Pujari, for being there. And thanks to Dr. Ramchandra, who has left us. Vijay, the stage is all yours to wind up. And I've already thanked all the people who helped us out today.
So on behalf of GCCMC, I would thank all the eminent faculty again for taking out their time and actually contributing. GCCMC doing a great work. It is not a pharma supported or anything. It's a pure CSR activity which is being done for the sake of medical fraternity. So I thank Wipro for enabling this platform. Also, I would like to inform all the participants that on 22nd of December, we would have one more webinar and the topic would be vaccine challenges and opportunities. So would request all of you to join. Also, for past webinar and this webinar, we are going to make certificates available for all of you, which can be downloaded. You would be intimated on the mail. And all this webinars would be recorded, have been recorded, and it would be available for everybody to view or to be circulated. So thanking everybody. Thank you all participants for your time. Hope we have been able to make some slight difference in the way the COVID is being treated. Thank you all. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.